It's the podcast show with Matt and Mo.
The podcast show with Matt and Mo.
It's the podcast show with Matt and Mo.
The podcast show with Matt and Mo.
Hello and welcome to the podcast show with Matt and
Mo.
Mo. This has been a brilliant episode. Okay, I'm not. I don't want to sound, too confident and too, excited. But we've just finished having a conversation with a friend of yours about the media, and I would like you in a second just to introduce your friend and tell us who he is. But I've had a fascinating hour with a gentleman who I could have spoken to all day. It was really, really interesting, and really, it was kind of like. You introduced him, and then I just asked him lots and lots of questions because it was so fascinating. Everything he said led me to have another question and another question and another question.
Yeah.
So tell us who you have arranged for us to speak to this week.
It's my honor to present a public figure like that. His name is Mr. Mohamed Shokeir, former broadcast journalist at the Arabic section of Radio Japan NHk, BBC World Service, and Al Jazeera English Channel. He has a very big history in the media career, and it was very, very nice opportunity to take a look on this history from himself. And I think the audience will notice that today how much Matt was very hungry to take more knowledge and more information from Mr. Mohamed Shokeir non-stop, which is very perfect conversation. I enjoyed by myself. I enjoyed of this conversation between you and him, and I'm very excited to start this episode now, and I hope our audience will like that.
I'm sure they'll enjoy it just as much as I did, because we're talking to a man who has decades of experience in the media and who has seen it change, and who is as passionate about this type of media, our type of media, podcasts, social media, and its influence and effect that it has in the Arabic world, in the Western world, everywhere in the world. It's really is a vehicle for change, and it was great to get that insight from someone who's got such a rich history, and who's clearly a very intelligent man, and who has been first-hand reporting on some very, very big events in his part of the world, in the Middle East, and also globally.
So let's start now to listen to this. I can say this is very big added value on our podcast show. Let's listen to the retired broadcast journalist, Mr. Mohamed Shokeir, in this interview with Matt and Mo.
Welcome to our very special guest.
Welcome to you, Mr. Mohamed.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Very kind. I really, I'm very grateful to having me with this very distinguished, highly different kind of show that I'm looking forward to listening. I've heard the first two episodes, and I must admit I was really impressed.
Thank you very much. That's very nice for you to say so. I guess in a lot of ways, with podcasting and kind of do-it-yourself media like this, do-it-yourself broadcasting, this is where we've got the meeting of what I'm doing with no media training whatsoever, and then someone like yourself who is vastly experienced in the media. Would you like to just give us a brief history into your own personal background, please?
Sure. I started as a proofreader / writer to replace someone who was writing articles in Arabic for the Japanese correspondent, and then a couple of Saudi newspapers in Saudi Arabia, and then I moved up to become a broadcast journalist with the NHk Arabic section in Tokyo, Japan, for about 8 years, during which I had my very initial broadcast training. And then I moved to the BBC World Service, the Arabic service, in 1995 for 11 years, during which I spent 2 years at the BBC World Service television as a producer. And then moving to Al Jazeera English in 2006, 2007, with the launch of the Al Jazeera English Channel, and stayed with them until 2016. Briefly, that's it. Now, I don't work in the media anymore, but I work as an editor of Arabic media in one of the universities in the Gulf.
So you weren't kidding, Mo, when you said this is a very experienced guy in the media.
Now we meet big history
Yeah.
in the media career. I used to say that all the time. When I meet Mr. Muhammad, I feel myself as a student.
I must admit that I'm really impressed, and I also feel that when you say Mo, because I always been called Mo as well, so I'm about to answer.
Well, we'll call you Mr. For the purposes of this, we'll call you Mr. Mohammed, and we'll call you Mo.
Yes, to make this difference.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So so I mean, it's so how many years was that? When did it's a long? Was it? When did you say you started? Sorry,
I started 1984. When I started proofreading and writing these articles, 1984, 1985. And then I joined the NHK in Radio Japan in 88. And then I joined the BBC in 95. And then I joined Al Jazeera in 2006.
So it's a long time in terms of technology, in terms of the way things have changed. Can you just give us a bit of an insight into your personal take on that, please?
Yes, of course. When I first started, it was an electric typewriter was the state of the art. And it was, I remember using an electric typewriter at work, but I also had my own little portable typewriter, which was a small Japanese thing that you can carry on a little briefcase. But at the NHK Radio Japan, which is supposedly, people look at Japan as the top technology and a state of the art, they had a very heavy, old-fashioned typewriter as well that we used to type Arabic, because that was the only thing available, and we continued to use that. And they used tapes, with marker and blades, and you cut with the blade and you stick the tape together and stuff. That was the editing. And even when I moved to the BBC, they still had the same more or less kind of technology, very sort of wrapped back. But the only thing that was working there was the facsimile machine. Other than that, everything was manual, and that was the time that was just starting to witness the word processing systems in computers. And of course, they were a separate entity. They were separate machines on their own. They were called word processors. And it was integrated into a computer. When you had the tickers, when you had the old-fashioned kind of a telex kind sort of machine that brings in what the wires has been saying, and you need to subscribe, and it was very expensive. Not anybody can do this, and now it's all free. But that's how it started. And then they had the same wires on a computer system that was very primitive. And that was coming in, but you can only use that to type very little texts. And I remember that even the running order that we used to type, we used to do on the typewriter and or give it to a secretary who would type it before we take it to the studio.
It's the podcast show with Matt and Mo.
The podcast show with Matt and Mo.
It's the podcast show with Matt and Mo.
The podcast show with Matt and Mo.
Everything that was needed to create print media, to create broadcast media, was very big, very expensive, and required specialist skill to use. It's changed to the degree that you can literally, well, you can't really print, not in volume in your bedroom, but you can do pretty much everything else from your own home now, can't you? So it's changed hugely.
Exactly, and it happened very quickly. It didn't take very long before everything was automated and digitized. And when I left the BBC, they had more than one system. One of them was the ENPS, which is still used up till today. But before that, they had something called Dave, and Dave was more of a digital recording system that we used to record programs and edit them, instead of having to use the blade and the tape, which was very messy, and sometimes it even caused injuries and stuff. Yeah, those are the good days I remember. I mean, most of the Arabic radio heritage and good name and reputation was built during those times. In the 90s, the invasion of Kuwait to start with, and then the Iraq War and so on, the Gulf War. And this was the time when everybody was gathered around the radios in Arabic to listen to the BBC Arabic service, which had big names. I had the honor to have worked with some of those people before they passed away, and they became legends, and they still remain as some of the most famous broadcasters in the Arab world. And they used to judge things by how much criticism do we get from both sides. People who say that you are pro-Iraq, and the others who would say that you are pro-Kuwaiti, and therefore when you get more or less equal kind of criticism or letters from audiences, then you know you're doing well, because both sides criticize you, and more or less evenly.
So you're presenting balance. I know that Mo's got some questions he wants to ask, but when you mention something like that, and you mention your involvement in something like that during a time of conflict, obviously it makes me think of your experiences, your personal experiences in dealing with that, in being involved in that, and broadcasting and being part of the media. And also, obviously, it mirrors what's going on today. There is a similar issue at the moment. So from the point of view of somebody who's working in the media, how is it? What's the experience like? It must be incredibly fast-paced. There must be a lot of pressure. It must be very stressful. There's obviously lots of humanitarian things that you probably see that don't get broadcast and things like that. So give us an insight, if you wouldn't mind, please, into that experience.
Of course. I will have to start by saying, maybe this is rather unusual, but the putting the audience in mind and at heart, and making sure that you respect the audience, you respect the people you're talking to, and you treat them as intellectual beings who would listen, understand, analyze, compare, and reach their own conclusions. That was the bottom line. Because if you didn't do that, if you would turn into one of those state broadcasting that would blow the trump and basically just try to sound or convey the words of whatever regime is trying to get across to people, and is not even giving them the opportunity to think. Very sad, but this is the way it has been in the Middle East and the Arab world. And that's why a lot of people counted on the BBC as the impartial voice, the truth. And although the BBC Arabic did not disappoint their audiences in very, very rare cases, maybe they did once or twice, but even when they did, they still apologized and they corrected whatever it was. But the situation now is completely different. Although you are still in the Middle East, we're still talking about, because the Middle East is always a good example to use to indicate the gap that has widened so much when a particular head of state in one of the largest Arab states, still up till a few weeks ago, is telling the people, millions and millions, listen only to what I say. Don't listen to anybody else. That is ridiculous. That is sad. Sorry to say, it's not. You don't treat human beings like that.
I think now I feel Matt like hungry to know more information.
Honestly, I mean,
Mohammed. Because of that, I respect this moment,
yeah.
and I feel you have more questions. Please continue, because I enjoy this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. It really is, and I'm sure that those people listening are enjoying it as well. But this is kind of my style, and I think it's very inquisitive, and it's very much in the moment, because you will say things that will just trigger a curiosity in me. And I think one of the things that I was interested in talking to you about was and I think you've kind of touched on it there with the subject of impartiality and balance, and the people have often a very sort of dim view of the mainstream media. They believe that it's set to an agenda and it's driven by one side or another. Do you think that the invention of podcasts and do-it-yourself media has given, is that a good thing or a bad thing in terms of getting information out there?
Yes, no, it's a wonderful thing if you can promote it properly to the wider audience, because all the social media is now acting as a counterbalance to the mainstream media that has been, whether it is driven by a particular government regime or a commercial establishment, and they would like to get as many people as possible to make more money from advertising and stuff. This is Noam Chomsky's theory. I'm sure you've heard about it. The thing is, to people in third world or underdeveloped, or where we come from in the Middle East, the social media is a God-given gift and blessing, because it gives people this access to find out exactly what the other side is saying, even though they have been prevented from broadcasting, they have been banned. There is a lot of distortion. Some of the websites cannot even be open for. You need to go through some sort of a loop somewhere to get this. This is not preventing people from accessing these media alternatives. And as it has been said again in the country that where I come from, that the current leader is actually comparing himself to President Nasser back in the 50s and 60s, and says Nasser was lucky with his media machine. Of course, Nasser was lucky with the media machine because it was only 2 radio stations and a couple of newspapers. But that's it. That was everything that people were allowed to see or read or listen to. Now you cannot control that, and you will never be able to, regardless of how hard you try, because people will still compare, will still reach their own conclusion. And in fact, the more you try to spend money on fancy equipment and a lot of resources to try and convey your word across, you're making the gap and the space between you and the audience wider and wider, because you're not actually touching on what they want to hear. You're not dealing with the issues they want to talk about. You're not trying to solve anything. So you live in a particular bubble of your own and you expect everybody else to listen. And that's not the case in the Middle East anymore. And it will never be the case anymore.
Please do stay with us on the podcast show with Matt and Mo. We'll be back after this very short break to carry on this fascinating discussion about all things media with the hugely experienced former BBC Arabic and Al Jazeera English producer and broadcaster, Mr. Mohamed Shokeir. See you soon. It's the podcast show with Matt and Mo.
The podcast show with Matt and Mo.
It's the podcast show with Matt and Mo.
The podcast show with Matt and Mo.
Do you have an idea, a subject, a business topic, a skill, an experience, or a story that you are passionate enough to turn into a podcast? QPod is Oldham's only dedicated professional podcast production company and studio, and we can make that happen. Visit kupod.co.uk, follow us at QPodUK, and let us help you be sound. It's the podcast show with Matt and Mo.
The podcast show with Matt and Mo.
It's the podcast show with Matt and Mo.
The podcast show with Matt and Mo.
Regardless of there only being a very small number of media outlets in the past and a certain number of newspapers, radio stations, TV channels, etc., we've now gone the opposite way, and we have countless podcasts, broadcasters, social media accounts, etc., etc. And despite the huge choice available to people, people still find themselves in a bubble of what they want to hear and what they want to believe, rather than exploring certain people, I should say. Not everybody, but it's still an issue. It's still, you look into the United States, for example, Donald Trump's a great example of his followers, the echo chamber around him. Brexit was the same in the UK. You know, you can still be very powerful by manipulating the media, regardless of the fact that there is so much media. How do you think that in the future that can be dealt with? Can it be dealt with? Or is this just something that the people that are trying to get the right messages out there are just going to have to keep working hard to try and prevail?
It's a two-way street, sir, because you're trying to get your message across to as many people as possible, but also on the other hand, the people have to have the interest. They need to look for the reliable sources of news and information. And if they don't do that, if they just sit and put their feet up and have a six-pack next to them and start, then they are not interested. Then basically they are just wasting time, and they will absorb whatever the television gives them, whether it's right or wrong. They are not even questioning whether it is right or wrong and how accurate it is. That is the danger. That is why the two sides need to work on this. You're trying as hard as you can to get your message across to as many people as possible, but the audiences also should be hungry for knowledge, who should be curious to know what is the bottom line. How did this happen? The example of the hospital in Gaza a few days ago, when the U.S. president came up and said, "It's not you, it's the other camp," this was taken at face value. A lot of people sort of will never doubt what the U.S. president is saying, as if it's sacrosanct, as if the words of this man, a man of this magnitude, should not even have any doubts about. The investigation that were carried out later by other professional, more forensic-related organizations have proven that this was not accurate, this was not correct, and there are further investigations that need to be carried out if you want to really find out what happened. So to capitalize on what the President of the United States has said in a statement that was not even properly verified by those allegedly experts who are supposed to know and verify every word before he is allowed to say it in public, it goes through billions of people in the world. This is a deliberate mistake that tries to promote and put a shield behind everything that he said, that you're not allowed to raise doubts about the statement, the truth of this statement, and whether it is some sort of a sacred text, is a sacrosanct words that and they started, people when people started raising doubts about this, then you had people asking, do you actually mean to doubt the President of the United States? As if, but of course there were verifications and checks and tests, examinations done in a forensic professional manner by Channel 4 did one, and there is a couple of others who are actually raising strong doubts about the validity of that statement. And they examined it in terms of audio, from the angle that was shot from, and the amount of damage it caused, and all that to try and conclude that this was not accurate. It was not true statement as such.
There's always been a false belief that your governments would never lie to you, and et cetera, and that's obviously been disproven a long time ago. Probably, I think in America, President Nixon and Watergate was probably the big watershed moment in terms of that you really can't believe everything that you hear or read or see, and since then it's become more and more apparent. And I think obviously it's kind of come full circle with Donald Trump. I think, and I'm talking from a sort of a Western democracy point of view. I live in Britain, and I have very limited knowledge of the Arabic world. I don't speak the language. I don't follow it in the same way that you guys do, but you'll be able to tell me. But I mean, we've come full circle with Donald Trump and Brexit, where people can brazenly lie without, like you're just saying, without any fact check. You can be the President of the United States of America. You can say what you want, seemingly with very little actual consequences. Hopefully that won't be the case. I'd be delighted to see him in prison after what happened on January the 6th. But it's a real struggle, like you said, when you've got people of that magnitude and states of the so-called democratic world, because the democracy is based on the ability to think critically, to be able to question, to challenge, but it only works if what you're being told is true. And what you have to start from a base of truth. So when everything is being doubted, when everything is being questioned, even at the very highest levels, how does the mainstream media, and how does, if you like, independent or amateur media, such as what we're doing, how does that effectively challenge something like that in a positive way, do you think?
As I tried to explain earlier, that there are two parties. One is sending and the other one is receiving. And unless the receiver, who is the audience in this case, has the interest and the willingness and ready to take time to verify what has been said and find out exactly how accurate it is, you will have a very difficult time trying to reach or get your message across. What we have in the Middle East, in the Arab world, people have become more desperate for true and accurate news, because what they have been seeing and listening to is basically lies accumulated on top of lies, and that had created this big divide and gap between them and the establishment and the regime or the government or whoever is running that. This alternative media, this all the social media, and because they work together. And that's how they started the Arab Spring in 2011. That's how that spark started. And that's why most of the regimes now are so keen on having their own, what they call electronic committees. Sometimes they call them flies, sometimes to try and distract people or maintain some sort of balance, to show that there is a counterpoint out there that is supporting the current regime or the current God knows what. Of course, this all would collapse if they were given a real opportunity to voice their interests or their opinions. But only in that part of the world, people can go to jail for expressing a view, which is more like back in the Middle Ages in Europe or the US.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things that are springing to mind there. The fact that it seems to have gone full circle again in terms of like you've had this experience in the Arab world of not trusting what's coming out of leaders' mouths. That is now happening over here, where they are blatantly lying, they're blatantly telling us things that aren't true. But every time there's a backlash by the people. But then obviously it's all about power. It's all about, we follow the money at the end of the day. That's how it works. But now you've got the introduction of AI. So on social media, there will be, powerful states with lots and lots of money will be able to engage AI to have conversations with people, to counter, things like that. It's going to become a very, very difficult struggle to find the truth.
Absolutely. I agree. But also the receiver end, is it an educated human being who is interested and who has the mental capacity to be able to distinguish between statements and compare material or not? Because where we come from, there is a keen effort to try and maintain people uneducated, unknowing of what there should go on around their countries, of having the mock-up parliament and other representations, because they are not real. They don't represent the people. But yet, to the outside world, it looks like it's real. But in fact, no, they don't want people to be educated, because educated people would mean more trouble. They don't want people to be aware of what their options are, even if it is written in the Constitution, because not a lot of people can read, which is another challenge. You see, we are trying to survive here. We're trying to keep our heads above water. Unlike in the Western world, where you started recently doubting what the organization, the government is saying, and you started to raise questions that maybe will be very hard to come up with answers for, especially in Europe and in countries like the US, where there is a degree of intellect and people are not treated like a herd of sheep, where they have to be dragged by the nose into doing things that they don't want to do.
Yeah, but I think there's definitely an issue of a lack of education. Working class people, poor people, their education isn't such that it promotes critical thinking. A large section of our society in places like Britain and the US are kept at a certain educational level for a reason. And they're dumbed down by media, by TV, by food, even. There are still lots of challenges. If you look at, you would think that any critical thinker with any kind of education would look at someone like Donald Trump and just think, this guy, what? But yet he got millions and millions of votes, and people believe what he says because they haven't the ability clearly to think critically, to look at both sides of the argument. So I think it is an issue, even in countries like the US and Britain.
Yes, I agree. It is an issue, but I don't think it is a serious matter to the depth that it is elsewhere in the developing world. Yeah. And of course, with the vast majority of people at least are aware of their rights, their legal rights, their constitution, or how things are done, and they can always go to their MP or go to their representative somewhere and either write him a letter or go talk to him or send him a message somehow.
What you were just saying then was, it was a nice comparison actually, because it helps us to understand just how different things are, and how much more desperate it is for a lot of other people in the kind of situations that you're describing. So I guess when you're saying about social media and having these voices challenging, and like you said earlier, putting themselves at risk and really taking chances, it is hugely important, isn't it? And is it really having a much broader effect, would you say, in terms of helping move things forward for people who are struggling in those places?
I think it is, because some of the top priorities by people who can hardly have enough food, or who can hardly have secure their next day income, is that they have a smartphone and they are connected to the internet, and they do all sorts of things on it, including discussions and chats and talking to others about issues. And in other words, where people used to sit together on cafes and talk about things, they don't have to do that now. And in fact, in a lot of cases, because people are doing 2 and sometimes 3 jobs, and sometimes, but where political work or activity has become a luxury for a lot of people, especially in the third world or where I come from, this takes part of or compensates for some of that missing element in becoming active or being at least aware of what's happening. And because people forward messages to each other, especially in the current situation, in crises like the ones we have now, where people are, people do not feel that their viewpoint is getting across to the Western world, to the Western viewers, to the Western audience, but they would like to get that done. And there are very, very few channels that can help convey that message. Most of those are social media, and whether it is a Twitter or Clubhouse or Facebook or etc. Although some of the actual networks are also trying to crack down on, let's say, pro-Palestinian voices or people who, when they start in the news, and that is sad, because when they start talking in the third person, when they say a number of Palestinians have been killed, and then they talk about events, and they don't say who killed them until the 4th or 5th line, where you actually lost the initial part of the news story. And this is deliberate. This is trying to reduce the importance of certain group of people, make them more insignificant, while what happened to the Israelis would always be a headline. And when you have an Israeli guest, you would always have the presenter paying condolences and feeling sympathetic, and having the top part of the interview would always have this, I am very sorry for what happened to you, etc., etc. Until you have someone like, I don't know if you have seen Bassem Youssef recent interview with Piers Morgan, for example. Yes, that was out of the norm, because he capitalized on those shortcomings. He played that card in a very satirical way. It's sad, but it's true. And the number of audience, it became number 1 hit in all Piers Morgan's shows since he started working. This was by far the highest. And it was with someone who they never expected that it would reach that much, because of the way he handled it, and because how he put the facts within a very bitter but sarcastic frame.
Please do stay with us on the podcast show with Matt and Mo. We'll be back after this very short break to carry on this fascinating discussion about all things media with the hugely experienced former BBC Arabic and Al Jazeera English producer and broadcaster, Mr. Mohamed Shokeir. See you soon. It's the podcast show with Matt and Mo.
The podcast show with Matt and Mo.
It's the podcast show with Matt and Mo.
The podcast show with Matt and Mo.
Do you have an idea, a subject, a business topic, a skill, an experience, or a story that you are passionate enough to turn into a podcast? QPod is Oldham's only dedicated professional podcast production company and studio, and we can make that happen. Visit kupod.co.uk, follow us at QPodUK, and let us help you be sound. It's the podcast show with Matt and Mo.
The podcast show with Matt and Mo.
It's the podcast show with Matt and Mo.
The podcast show with Matt and Mo.
That's the thing about having the mainstream media and someone like Piers Morgan, who I don't have very much time for, to be honest. When somebody has that kind of a profile and it has that kind of reach, given the right circumstances, it can be very powerful, can't it? It can reach a huge mainstream audience and have a great impact. And I think that's the thing with DIY broadcasting. That's what me and Mo are very passionate about, telling stories and getting people to tell their stories. I think it's the most, like you mentioned the cafe before, the campfire, whatever you want to, or the pub, wherever you want to go back in and around in history. People have shared their stories, but you can only share your stories with the people around the table, whereas now you can share your stories with people around the world. And the most powerful thing to a human being is another human being's story. I genuinely believe that, and it's the one thing that will move you more than anything else. And now we need to hear the stories, the truth, that person's truth, because all you can tell is your own truth. You can't tell anybody else's truth. So when it comes and it's powerful from that individual, it's huge in its impact.
There is a dire need in the Arab world and the Middle East, particularly for this sort of media, because I don't know if you noticed this, but believe it or not, some of the most outspoken against Israelis' apartheid policies and the way Palestinians are treated and the current situation, all through history, have been Israeli scholars and historians. And those do not face the barricades, do not face the barriers or the blocks that any other voices from the Middle East, if they are Arabs, would face. You know, even Edward Said, for example, had a lot of criticism. But when you talk about someone like Ilan Pappé right now, or others, those are top-notch Israeli historians. He doesn't live in Israel anymore. He lives in Oxford in the UK. But he has a book that shook the world about the genocide of Palestinians and in the occupied territories. And this man also said, which is true, because I was there. I covered the Israeli elections in 1996 that brought Netanyahu into office for the first time, and I witnessed this. And I was told by a couple of people that they used to let Hamas supporters go if they were arrested. Hamas was supported and fostered by Israel in its infancy, and it was created to divide the Palestinian front into two. When the Israelis thought they can achieve that by creating a smaller entity that would grow to compete with Fatah, and they did. They grew to compete with, and they became this monster that they can't control. Now they're trying to erase from the face of the earth altogether. But without the Israeli support and help in their beginnings, they wouldn't have become what they are now. That is something very hard to admit, but only Israeli historians would tell that story, and they would say to the world in plain and simple language in English. While Arabs, even if you say that 100 times, no one would want to listen to you, because they have pre-accepted ideas about your leniencies, your tendencies, and the way you think, and therefore they don't want to listen to you. But when it comes from a Western voice, or someone who is originally was supposed to be a victim, a Holocaust victim, or someone else, then it becomes audible, then it gets an ear, then it becomes popular, and it sadly, but that's how it resonates through the world.
Yeah, Israel are not alone in doing stuff like that. The CIA, the British. There's a long history of giving somebody arms, giving somebody support, whatever, and then that becoming another issue in itself. So, look, there's a lot of things going on in the dark, like behind us in the dark here, going on that we don't know about. But what we can do, and I think this is my sort of my passion, is our personal responsibility, our collective responsibility to question things and to share and to listen. I think that is the most important thing that we can do. We don't have to do a great deal. We can't all, be martyrs to a cause. We can't all be prime minister or whatever. But we can give the person opposite us the time of day to listen to what they have to say and to be open-minded enough to accept it. Because I think what's one of the other things is people just kind of have a preconception of an idea in their head that when somebody's talking to them, they're already thinking, no, that's not true. I don't believe you. Somebody's telling you their truth. It's probably true, even if you don't want to hear it. And the more difficult and the more uncomfortable it is sometimes, the more important it is. So I think that these kind of platforms, these kind of social media and podcasts are a vital tool. And I think we've covered that today. I think you've made a really compelling point.
Definitely. I agree with you. Yes, absolutely. Thank you. We spoke about the Arabic radio in its early stages or at the glory time in the early 90s. And now, last year, the Arabic radio was closed down. The BBC Arabic radio, which has 80 plus years of history and heritage, closed down. And I felt that although it was sad, they saw no use of Arabic radio in the Middle East because the public in the Arab countries are not only not listening to the radio anymore, but because they are not as effective or capable of doing anything that would impact on the policies of their countries, at least in the foreseeable future. The masses in these countries who were very vibrant and active in the 60s and the 70s are no longer. And now it's considered a waste of money to continue to spend money on Arabic radio while those listening to the radio are not really capable of doing anything that would have an impact on the future of their countries, not to mention the future of our relationship with the world or the UK, and therefore, what is the point? I think that was the main reason behind shutting it down.
But Mr. Mohammed, on the other hand, many people in the Middle East and Arab countries no longer trust BBC Arabic as they used to. They believe that the news provided by BBC Arabic has become less credible in the past 20 years, as I think. Do you agree with me about this point?
Yeah, this is true. This is true to an extent, to a large extent. In fact, I would say that because not only because now they have other options, because there are multiple channels, as you mentioned, Al Jazeera, among others, who can also give a more maybe accurate, maybe a little more emotional, sometimes closer to the hearts of the Arabs. But on the other hand, because this is not my saying, this is something that I was told by a senior member of the Middle East BBC correspondence, someone really well known, and I'm sorry, I don't want to say the name, but she said that they are under tremendous pressure from the Israelis on daily basis. This is BBC World Service Television. That the Israelis are applying so much pressure on all levels of management in the BBC, within the BBC, and it seems like they have managed to achieve something. They got a breakthrough recently, and that for that at least I don't know what to say, but it's recognition that yes, maybe you are not as impartial, objective as you used to be. You still remain one of the good ones, but unfortunately, you won't have the hearts and the full attention of people who used to remain silent while you're talking, because now you are mirroring what other places in the Western world have been saying all along. And this is sad, but it is true. I guess it's something we have to admit.
I think that authenticity is the most valuable currency we have these days when it comes to the media, when it comes to presenting information. It has to be authentic, it has to be correct, it has to be factual. Once you lose your integrity, it's very, very hard to recover, isn't it?
Yes.
You know, that is your responsibility as somebody who's, you know, like yourself, who's dedicated his life, professional life to sharing information, to reporting. Your integrity is everything, and keeping that is your responsibility. Once that goes, then is it in the media? Is it pretty much impossible to recover?
It is. It's not impossible, but it's very hard, as you said. It's like having a true friend, someone you relied on, you believed, and you thought, you know, he doesn't do wrong and everything. So, but once you found out that he has been deceiving you somehow or cheating or there's something wrong, then it would become extremely difficult to regain that level of trust again. And especially when there are alternatives out there, you probably would go find somebody else.
I guess it's much easier to keep to maintain your own personal integrity, but when you're part of an organization, organizational integrity is much more difficult to maintain because you've got so many individuals involved in maintaining that integrity. And like you've just said, an institution can lose its integrity as well.
Yes, and also because with all due respect, our adversaries or our enemies know where to hit. They know who are the people they need to have strong influence with to win, because after all, politicians would like to be re-elected or elected, and everyone, they are both now competing to please the Zionists, how to make those happy. If we, like, you can see that when President Biden seems to have given 100% support to Israel, even without, before his Secretary of State Blinken has been talking about the two-state solution for the last God knows how many years, since he became in charge of foreign affairs. And Netanyahu has been brushing him off, totally disregarding everything he says about two-state solutions. That was not mentioned, not once, in the recent events. The number of like Security Council resolutions, the number of American vetoes to obstruct the passage of anything that would lead to a possible breakthrough and a decent peaceful solution to the Middle East crisis. This is history that has to be mentioned at the bottom of every news story that deals with this part of the world. It would take an extra line or two, but you need to remind people of that. And unfortunately, that's also deliberate. Nobody wants to remind people of the history, because to them, history started 2 weeks ago. Yeah. Before that, there was nothing.
It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of effort to unearth the truth. You have to go back years and years and years, and things are conveniently forgotten or rewritten, or people think of it as some kind of like Stalinist kind of rewriting of history, or it would only happen in places like that. But it really isn't the case. It's the inconveniences are left out of British history at every turn. I mean, if you believe the published British history, you're missing out on so much actual history. So it is a challenge, but it requires that mindset, like we've touched on already, to disengage from. And I think disengaging from mainstream media, certainly for a while, is really, really good, because I stopped having a TV in 2013. So I stopped having any of the commercial channels, anything. I only streamed what I wanted to stream, followed what I wanted to follow on social media. And I found it very, very liberating. I found it very freeing, because people get drawn into the kind of the routine, the repetition, the comfort of the familiarity of things. And it's only when you break away that you're able sometimes to look at something from afar and reevaluate what it's all about. So I found that to be a really, really healthy thing. So it means when you re-engage with it in a different way, from a different perspective.
You see, what you do, Matt, is that you are actually documenting events firsthand from witnesses who actually happen to be there or witness things and this is very important. This is as important as academic documentation of research resources, basically, because the material you're documenting can be, if it is properly documented, can be used as a reference when you are referring to an issue. This has been the case with few and among other podcasts that I've heard, and I'm sure Mo knows about this guy who died recently, Mohamed Shokeir, who had something called Podcast 11, and he interviewed people who were deeply involved in the revolution, in the 2011 revolution, and they revealed how they were deceived by the military and how bad it has become for them, but it was too late. And this was said in his podcast. And those are people like the person who was the right arm of Mohammed al-Baradei, who was supposed to be a top-ranking politician. People counted on him to lead the movement, but how they were mishandled and cheated. This is all in one small podcast by someone who died recently, but I couldn't find any significant source comparable to that material anywhere else.
Mr. Mohammed, how can the media falsify facts and install a false mental image in the minds of people, in your opinion?
Okay, I think this is... Remember when I said they put things in the third person? When they put things in the third person and you don't know who is actually causing this, you don't know, and then you disregard deliberately try to neglect or omit a part of the history related to that story that would explain the logic or the reasons behind what it is happening. This is all how you can give that false image or impression. Telling half the truth is not lying, but it's deceiving. And that's what they do. And this is basically what has been happening all along with some very, very famous author, and he was like the top ranking journalist in the Middle East and the Arab world, who was the most important person to President Nasser in the 50s and 60s. This man wrote books, thousands of pages, about wars, about conflicts, he has a book called The Explosion, 1967 War. More than 1,000 pages. He wrote lots of documentation, but he only put the documentation that support his angle, his view, and the rest of it was disregarded. You have to go find it somewhere else if you want to counterbalance that. And it's a very hard work. Mohamed Hakeil, yes, Mohamed Hakeil. His works were translated into Japanese. I remember that because my wife was reading his books. Unbelievable, so renowned, but yet he was not honest, to tell it bluntly. Yeah. And that's how they do.
Honestly, I could sit here and talk to you all day, but you're on your lunch break, and we only have about 51 minutes of actual time for this podcast. So we can't do that, unfortunately. But it's been absolutely fascinating talking to you. I've really, really enjoyed it. I'd love to talk to you some more. And that's what I wanted from this particular episode is I think we've highlighted the importance of this kind of media. And, yes, and I think we only need one tip and trick this week, and that is just tell the truth.
I am really grateful for this opportunity. Thank you very much. I really encourage you to continue doing the good work you're doing, and I really encourage you to maintain that good quality of material and testimonies by people, because they become a record in history. Thank you very much for having me.
The podcast show with Matt and Mo is a QPod production for Oldham Community Radio. It is written and hosted by Matt Dean and Mohammed Mahfouz. If you'd like to follow and interact with us on social media, you can find us on Instagram, TikTok and Facebook at KUPOD UK. We love your feedback and ideas for the show. If you'd like to be a guest on the show to tell us about your podcast or your YouTube show, please email info@kupod.co.uk. You can find out more about QPod, Oldham's only dedicated podcast production company, by visiting www.kupod.co.uk. The title music was composed and produced especially for the show by Matt Berry at King Buzzard Studios in Shaw.
The podcast show with Matt and Mo.